100% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to the BIA Podcast. It is Wednesday, late morning. Maybe later than that by the time you get around to hearing it, but that's the time we're recording it. I am fresh off of vacation. I don't know if I would say fresh. I think that people who come off of vacation and run around and do a lot of stuff aren't necessarily as well rested as we would like to believe coming off of vacation, but enough about me. We will talk about me, my favorite topic, a little later in the show, but a lot of recruiting news happening over the last week. Ohio State's picked up 3 big commitments. Could be on the verge of many more. Number could be, to be determined. But whenever it's time to talk recruiting, it's time to bring in Joseph Hastings, our great recruiting analyst, to talk about all the goings-on. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thanks for having me back on. Glad to hear that you had a safe trip there and back from the DR. And yeah, a lot of great stuff happened for Ohio State football recruiting with you gone. And we're going to get a little bit into it a little bit later in the show, as you mentioned, but it seems like they have pretty good luck while you're on vacation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes all the way back to when I went on my honeymoon, my first year running the site, and they managed to pull 3 guys at that point. And of course, very early in my site career, I didn't have as many people around me at the point working on the site. So just try working in the mid 2000s. From Mexico, trying to figure this out, knowing that you can't call anybody. It was a challenge. We'll just say that. But we'll talk about that for sure in segment 2. But let's get right to it. And I know that we've already had a podcast about JT Tuimoloau. We've spoken about him at length. But even with that, it's still such a big get in so many ways that we're still sitting here talking about it. I mean, and he's only one of the 3, and he wasn't even the first of the 3 during that short run to pop. But that's the name that everybody wants to talk about right now. And if we're being honest, JTT equals ratings. So, we're here to please you, our listeners. Just your thoughts, having, the benefit of a couple of days since his July 4th announcement, it being July 7th now, of, all things JTT.
Yeah, Kevin, first off, it's a little bit surreal that it's actually over. You've been covering this kid for so long. We've been covering them for so long. It honestly felt like he was a member of the 2020, 2021, and 2022 cycle, just based on how long this recruitment went. But for it to finally end, for him to finally say that he's going to be attending The Ohio State University, it was definitely kind of surreal given how long this recruitment has played out. And then also just being able to marinate on it for a couple of days now since he committed. But just everything that he had to say, everything that we kind of heard about, on the broadcast for his announcement about why he came to this decision, how big of a role Larry Johnson did play in it. That was kind of my biggest takeaway just over these past few days when thinking about the decisions that, all the schools on the pack, on the West Coast, Oregon, USC, the in-state Washington Huskies, Ohio State was obviously at a disadvantage there just in terms of the distance and how far away from his family he would be. But Larry Johnson really was the determining factor here. And, he's continuing to play a huge role in these commitments for big-time pass rushers like Jack Sawyer, obviously JTT as well. And I wrote in my impact analysis, and I'll say it again here, with JTT and Jack Sawyer being the 6th and 11th ranked players on Rivals.com overall in the 2021 class, respectively, if they live up to the hype and exceed expectations, which I think they can, it will just add them to that list of Chase Young, the Bosa brothers. How you hear kids talking about them now is how you may hear kids in the future classes talking about JTT and Jack Sawyer. So as long as Larry Johnson's still there, and he continues to develop these guys, which we expect him to do, into big-time NFL draft prospects. It's just going to continue to facilitate defensive end recruiting for years to come for Ohio State. So this is just big news overall for the Buckeyes, and the fact that we've seen how it's not really impacting their pursuit of 2022 defensive ends. You know, I heard from one of Eni White's coaches, who's a 2022 prospect out of Pennsylvania, that the decision won't impact Eni's consideration of the Buckeyes. You know, we saw JTT recruiting Amari Abar as well, so and Amari was receptive to it, you know, on Instagram. So that was kind of one of my concerns, was that maybe a Jack Sawyer and JTT class could impact 2022. Doesn't appear to be the case at all. So, yeah, those were kind of my big overall takeaways following these 2 or 3 days since JTT committed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we look at maybe quarterback recruiting or certain positions to where it's one guy, or very few who get all of the reps. But then you look at defensive line, especially under Larry Johnson, the way he likes to roll guys in and out of there, and that you're really not seeing a lot of guys getting north of 40 snaps a game. Granted, we've certainly seen games to where the Buckeyes are only playing 70 snaps on defense. So, 35 gets you half of it there, but he's certainly rolling guys in and out. So there's, more opportunity just based on the role of how guys are coming on and off of the field. So I would think, at least to a certain extent, unless the room just got crazy full, that it shouldn't have that much of a bearing. Even with there being 1 year difference, with JTT being a 21, somebody like an Eni White, since you brought him up as a 22, there's going to be, there would be at least 2 years of overlapping there, but, it's a position that bodes itself a little bit better to having that stockpile, because, it's going to be a case of where Larry's going to find the guys he needs to get out there, but he's also not going to gas guys by keeping them out there for 80% of the snaps, because that's always just been his method.
Yeah, and I think that definitely helps facilitate, prospects like Eni White, Amari Abar, others continuing to consider Ohio State despite them landing 2 5-star pass rushers. He's going to continue to rotate these players in and out. He's going to make sure that everybody gets time. If you're good enough to see the field, you will. So, that shouldn't be a deterrent for any of these prospects who are continuing to consider Ohio State. And one other thing I'll mention, I forgot to mention it before, is that JTT could very well end up developing into a defensive tackle. I know that, the dream scenario is to have him and Jack Sawyer opposite of one another, but he really does have the frame where if he puts on 25, 30 pounds under mixed system, under his strength and conditioning program, that I could very much see him sliding inside and outside. He really does have a lot of versatility. I kind of feel the same way about Chris Mcclellan, who we'll talk about a little bit later on, but JTT could very much end up developing into a defensive tackle as well. I wouldn't rule that out. So, yeah, honestly, just the way that even though Ohio State has no defensive linemen committed in the 2022 class just yet, the way defensive line recruiting is going for the Buckeyes, it really couldn't be going too much better. Maybe, you'd like to see some more interior defensive linemen since they only had 3 defensive tackles committed over the previous 3 cycles. But Johnson really has this group on the roll, and they're going to continue to land these big-time, edge rushers, these guys, these big-time defensive ends over the next few years. As long as Larry continues to be there, as long as, he continues to do his thing and land guys like JTT, Jack Sawyer, potentially, Amari Abar, whoever it may be, Caden Curry, he's going to continue to have this nice track record that he's built up. And, it's just definitely really exciting times for the Buckeyes right now.
You're listening to the BIA Podcast. Sorry, first day back from vacation. The Buckeye Grove Instant Access. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings, talking about Ohio State football recruiting over the last week. A lot of different directions we can go here, but I'm going to go back to the first of the 3 players to commit over this short period, and that would be 2022 cornerback Terence Brooks. And it's not often that a top 50 player, not only rivals 100, and I know we don't have a rivals 50 designation, but we certainly can say top 50 at number 48 in the nation, player goes largely under the radar. I mean, and check me if I'm wrong here. I mean, granted, I was in the Dominican Republic and was drinking really bad rum drinks and things like that, so I wasn't... I didn't have my thumb on the pulse of Buckeye Nation at that point, but people were very concerned with JTT, obviously, and a bunch of other things. It doesn't feel like there was as much discussion, whatnot, around Brooks's commitment. Granted, it really seemed to come together over the course of about 2 weeks. I mean, it just happened. I mean, this is a kid with three dozen plus offers, whatnot, and the Buckeyes get their guy, 6'1", 190 corner out of Little Elm, Texas, which is a Dallas suburb. Just one of the more odd situations, just for the lack of talk, because of, I think, just how quickly it came together.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever really seen a recruitment like this before. He's a top 50 overall player, as you mentioned. He had a top 5 that he had dropped a couple of months beforehand of Alabama, Florida, Oregon, Texas, and Texas A&M. So he was down to 5 finalists. These schools have been recruiting him for a long time. They were very much in the picture. And then Ohio State out of nowhere offers him on June 14th, gets him on an official visit a week later. A week after that official visit wraps up, exactly 1 week to the day, he commits to Ohio State. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in my years covering recruiting. Maybe you've seen a development that took so quickly for it to happen. And it wasn't like, Brooks was an under the radar prospect, like he was somebody who, no offense to these programs, but, they're not obviously championship contenders, in terms of like Louisville or, like an Indiana or something like that. Like Ohio State wasn't going up against them. They were going up against some of the top programs in their respective conferences. And for them to go into Texas and beat out Texas A&M, which is where his father, Chet Brooks, played football at, and to beat out Texas too. And then also Alabama, which is feeling really good about his recruitment. And not only that, Kevin, add into the fact that they already have 3 cornerbacks committed, one of them being Jaheim Singletary, who I believe we have as the second-ranked cornerback overall in the 2022 cycle. For Ohio State to do that, that's just extremely impressive. And if it hadn't been for JTT's commitment, it would have been the most impressive get for the Buckeyes of 2021, in my opinion. So, I'm still kind of stunned that he's in the class, considering the fact that they had so many cornerbacks committed, how quickly this recruitment developed. It kind of mirrored Kai Stokes in a way, but even then, Kai Stokes hadn't taken his visits to other schools. His recruitment had just began with Ohio State kind of entering the mix too. While Brooks was far along in his recruitment, this was just a stunning one in my opinion. And correction, Jaheim is the top ranked cornerback. So Brooks joined a pretty stellar class there with Jaheim and Jair Brown, and it's just really impressive stuff what Kerry Combs and Matt Barnes pulled off there.
And then just talking about recruitments that we just maybe not things that we expected. And that's about Ohio State's third commitment, Kojo Antwi, wide receiver out of Suwanee, Georgia. We had the chance to talk to Antwi during Southern Swing, and he certainly said the right things, and some things that he said either on camera, off camera, led me to believe Ohio State very much was a player. But then Ohio State goes and just keeps adding to the class. I mean, and you look at the receiver class in particular, and you just look at the depth that they have there, and you just look with what's going on, and then they go to Chicago and add somebody else who is designated as a body at this point, but or as an athlete at this point, but that he's going to be a receiver, and Kayla Brown, and you just think, well, something's got to give at some point, and I think a lot of people still kind of felt. Georgia was a player, the in-state Dogs, or Texas A&M certainly had some momentum at some point. And then all of a sudden, it just seems like something clicked again, and then everybody started to move toward warp speed, and before you knew it, Kojo Antwi commits to Ohio State.
Yeah, I mentioned it with Brooks, how he joined the class that had 3 cornerbacks, Jaheim Singletary, Jair Brown, Ryan Turner, Coach Antwi does the same thing with his position group, joined a class that featured Kayla Brown, Kayla Burton, Keon Grace. It just, honestly, I was not expecting this one here just because when they had added Kayla Brown to the fold, I know that Caleb played a different position. You know, he's going to be kind of that slot receiver, jet sweep kind of guy, a little bit of a gadget guy in a sense, but I really didn't think that they'd be able to pull this off, considering the fact that each of Antwi's other 4 finalists, Alabama, Georgia, USC, Texas A&M, they each only had 1 wide receiver committed in this class. So it stood to reason that, considering the talent that Ohio State has in their wide receiver room currently and the talent that they have in the 2022 class, that Antwi may have been like, you know what, I want to go somewhere else. Maybe that'll afford me some more playing time or anything like that. But as you talked about, we interviewed him a few months ago, and he said that competition wasn't going to be a big factor in his recruitment. And even though that's something that we hear a lot, you know, we know that competition depth chart does matter for some prospects. So that's how I thought it was going to play out. But he stuck to his word. He doesn't mind going to a class that has a ton of other elite wide receivers like himself, and he's going to be joining the position group that has a lot of talent at the position. So I wasn't expecting this one to be pulled off, but you can't count out Brian Hartline. I mean, I think that's kind of my big takeaway from this commitment right here, is that if Brian Hartline wants somebody, you know, and he goes all in for a prospect, probably going to land him. You know, that you just can't bet against him at this point. Considering all the talent that he's pulled in over these past few years, it's just absolutely stellar. So, Hartline's getting to the point where he's not only, in my opinion, best wide receivers coach when it comes to recruiting in the nation. He's getting into that conversation of best recruiter in the nation in terms of assistant coaches. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who disagrees with that he shouldn't be in that conversation.
Yeah, I think Brian Hartline's biggest opponent is the 85 scholarship limit more than anything else out there, because you sit there and you look, and I mean, this is, you know, Ohio State's become this destination for wide receivers, and that, I mean, every wide receiver certainly mentions Ohio State, whether or not Ohio State has really taken an interest in them. And, you know, just the hard cap of 85 and just the, you know, realistic numbers of how many receivers you can have. But if you would have told me coming off of the class of 21 and the class of 20 that Ohio State was going to put together another 4-man receiver room, you know, I wouldn't have completely said you were crazy. But with that being said, I could have seen it just being 3. But, you know, sometimes when you get the right 4 guys, how do you say no? But then, of course, it creates a trickle-down situation of, okay, well, Hartline in the receiver room got this position. Who doesn't get the spot? I mean, you know, we already kind of know that, we're looking, you know, in certain years at one tight end or whatnot, coming off of the year that they're getting, you know, Bennett Christian and Benji Gosnell. But Benji Gosnell, yeah, but where does that spot come from? But it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem nonetheless of trying to make sure that you can kind of play the. You know, I go to the NFL, you know, in caponomics. You certainly have caponomics here in terms of maintaining the 85, and it's even more confusing with the super seniors coming out of 2020 being a non-counter year. A lot of stuff that we could probably do another podcast on, and I don't want to slow this one down as we're closing in on the 19-minute mark, and we have not even taken a break, so we're going to take a 30-second timeout, run a break, and we'll come back and talk about a whole lot more here on the BIA Podcast. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HagueH2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Joseph Hastings. We spent the first half of the show talking about the 3 commits that have come in. We could have probably gone on for another 40 minutes there, but let's turn the page, and Ohio State's certainly not done yet at this point. a handful of guys that could be deciding relatively soon. Some have dates in mind, some maybe not. Sometimes you get the guy that says, well, I'm going to decide in September, and then they just can't hold off any longer, and then they decide in July. So, I'm going to start these in a different order than what I have here on my sheet. Let's talk a little bit about George Fitzpatrick. That was a name that Joseph reminded me of during our pre-podcast call. And, not somebody who draws a lot of media attention, certainly doesn't do the interviews, so maybe often overlooked by the fans, but not overlooked by Ohio State, let me tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. So George Fitzpatrick, four-star offensive lineman out of Colorado, he took an official visit to Ohio State last month, came away very pleased with how the visit went. Him and I were able to speak about it, and, he just overall was a great visit. Enjoyed spending time with Coach Stud, Coach Cook, just seeing the school, the academics, everything of that nature. So he really enjoyed it. And then he also told me that Ohio State was one of his 5 finalists. So fast forward just a little bit, and I start hearing recently, after he's taking these visits, that he may be coming to a decision soon. And I'm hearing that a decision could come as soon as next week. We don't know, though. No commitment date has been lined up, of course. It could get pushed back. So nothing definitive there, but, a decision date could be right around the corner. And I'm hearing that Ohio State could be as high as number 1 on his leaderboard. I don't know if this is going to go in Ohio State's favor or not. I haven't submitted a future cast just yet. I'm still waiting a little bit because I hear there could be a holdup. But yeah, I'm hearing that Ohio State is in a really good position to land him, with a decision date right around the corner. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. That's why I haven't submitted a future cast just yet, but it's looking pretty good for the Buckeyes' chances with him. And I haven't really heard another school that could be in the mix. I did hear that Oklahoma felt a little bit confident, but they couldn't get a good read on him. So, Florida's also in the mix for his services as well. This will be an interesting one to pay attention to. Oregon as well. So, with a decision date right around the corner, George Fitzpatrick appears to be leaning toward Ohio State, but I do have to do a little bit digging here, though I do feel good about the Buckeyes' chances.
Let's stay at the same position and talk about Humboldt, Texas offensive tackle Cam Dewberry. And he was another player that we had a chance to talk to on Southern Swing during our Texas leg. And, we've gone round and round about this. I mean, grew up a huge Ohio State fan. But, it seemed like he was potentially just going to stay south. I mean, it's one thing to grow up as a fan of a team and then you realize just kind of how far away they are or whatnot. But this 5-star, number 18 in the nation overall, offensive tackle, and there's some debate amongst people, experts or whatnot, is he really a tackle or a guard? Certainly sounds like Ohio State certainly has him pegged as a tackle despite being in that 6'3", 6'4" range. Reason for optimism for the Buckeyes here on this one?
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's a lot of reason for optimism, especially following that official visit that he took to Ohio State. Dewberry, as you mentioned, he said all the right things about Ohio State during these previous interviews, talked about them being his dream school he grew up rooting for. But those are the kind of recruitments that I get a little bit hesitant about, when that's the main part of their interest in the school. Usually I want to hear a little bit more about it. But based off what we've heard following that official visit, he could see himself, donning the scarlet and, scarlet and gray at the next level. He enjoyed his time. He was thrilled with how the visit went overall. That's according to, our recruiting analyst, Carson McRae. So it seems like things are going well for the Buckeyes. The only problem is when a decision could arrive. I put in a recruiting roundtable on Tuesday, which you can find on BuckeyeGrove.com, that with Dewberry having a couple official visits left to take, one of them being to Texas A&M, I'm a little bit hesitant about whether or not he would pull the trigger so early. We don't know. If it gets pushed out any further past July and then he starts taking those visits, you get a little bit concerned if you're the Buckeyes. So I'm a little bit hesitant on this one. If he comes out, if Cam Dewberry comes out, whether it's during this podcast next week or whatever, and says he's going to be announcing soon, I'm giving Ohio State the edge just based on the momentum that they've picked up. But if he decides to wait this out and takes those 2 official visits, I wouldn't say Ohio State's completely out of the mix, but I would be a little bit more hesitant about saying that he'll choose the program.
And let's hit a third name, and we'll move to the defensive side of the line, and that's defensive tackle Chris Mcclellan out of Owasso, Oklahoma, same school that produced Josh Proctor, number 100 in the nation, 4-star recruit. Another player that seems to have a lot of positive momentum trending with the Buckeyes at this point. There's a handful of future casts in there. Joseph already had his in. He was first one in late June. I followed up shortly thereafter. Carson's in, and then we've got some guys from the region as well who have picked Ohio State. Seems like this one is heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. And before I get to McClellan real quickly, I realized I said A&M. He hasn't taken his official visit to Texas, to my knowledge, so when talking about Cam Dewberry. But, yeah, back over to McClellan, I spoke with him after his official visit to Ohio State. He confirmed with me that the Buckeyes were his leader, that they're in the driver's seat right now. Overall, he was really impressed with the program, impressed with Larry Johnson and the plan that he has for him. He really feels like Larry has a good kind of like 3, 4, 5-year plan for him. Both academically and athletically, and also the fact that Ohio State's going to be losing some defensive linemen. McClellan, as I mentioned before, is a versatile player, can go inside or outside of the defensive line. So the Buckeyes prefer him as D tackle. So there's going to be opportunities for him to get on the field early and often if he chooses Ohio State. I think that's something that he recognizes and something that he's taken aback by. Also, the fact that he could become the first defensive lineman in this class is something that he's mentioned to me a couple of times is appealing. The only problem here is that he tweeted out that he's going to be focusing on his fast track classes, going to be focusing on school. So good for him in terms of prioritizing that over recruiting at this time. But I was saying that Ohio State probably want to capitalize on that momentum in the week or so after that visit. You don't want this one to be drawn out too much longer. For him to start taking some other visits and for Ohio State to potentially lose that momentum. But if he ultimately decides that after focusing on school, he is ready to wrap up his recruitment and decide whether it's later this month or maybe early August, I'm going to give the Buckeyes the advantage here. I think they're sitting in the driver's seat. I kind of felt that way going into the official visit that McClellan was a name to pay attention to, but everything that he told me after that visit, I felt very confident in making that future cast. And if he decides soon before he takes any other visits, I expect it to be Ohio State.
Before we get to our final topic of players deciding to commit once I'm out of the country and why people should just have me travel for a living, any other player that we didn't touch upon that keep an eye on coming here in the near term is we will have at the very end of the month, we will get back into, I guess it's considered a quiet period. We could see some kids coming back on campus, but those were the 3 names that we talked about in our pre-show call, but I want to give you an opportunity in case I'm blowing past anybody.
Yeah, I mean, Emil Wagner, in-state offensive lineman out of Wayne High School. I think you have to pay attention to him as well. He doesn't have the commitment date set in, but he took his official visits this past month. Once again, I spoke with him after his OV. He came away impressed, but more so academically, in terms of what they were able to provide for, him and his family is really focused on the educational aspect of things. So I'm still sticking with Ohio State in that recruitment, but just a little bit interesting to see with him because he hasn't given any hints. Like he hasn't tweeted out, getting close to making a decision or anything of that nature. But I believe he's somebody that people should pay attention to. As for anyone who could commit in the near future, I really don't see like a Hero Canoe doing so. I think he's going to want to take his official visit, maybe wait it out till November or December. So. And Zion Branch and Xavier Nwangpa still have official visits left to take in the fall. So I think Wagner, outside of the 3 that we had mentioned before, would probably be the next one that I would mention. So, but either way, I just overall, before we get into the next topic, overall, I really feel like Ohio State's on track to landing their first ever number 1 class on Rivals, barring a major change in the rankings or unexpected decommitments. They're on the path. If you go on the Rivals team rankings site right now. Ohio State is on a torrid pace right now. Their average star rating is incredible. The pace that they're on in terms of points is crazy as well. So, they're just overall recruiting at every single position at an elite level, and I expect them to add some even more some more elite prospects in the near future. If things go as planned for them.
Exactly, and they're sitting at 2,531 points right now as of this point. I'm rapidly going through my Dropbox to see if I can find my my notes, because I've done stuff on this plenty of times, but I don't know if I have it there. But I know that 2,531 is probably good for probably a top 5 to 7 class all time for Ohio State. I mean, just based on stories that I've done in the past or whatnot, and they certainly, I mean, they haven't even really touched certain positions at this point. So the good news is they should be able to really add to that, be able to get, it's certainly going to be a class that's going to go over 3,000. I mean, that's not a question there. And with the addition of JTT into their 21 class, I mean, they got into the mid 31s, which is right there. I know that there was conversations in terms of quote unquote TOS or the other site that this was the highest rated class for Ohio State within their formula. I haven't really looked at that. I've been out of the country, so it's
the second one. It's the second highest ranked one on Rivals.com. The 2021 class behind the 2018 class, so it nudged it out by like 60 points or so. But just to give some context in terms of the pace that Ohio State is on right now, if they add just 4 4-star recruits with a 5.8 ranking. So just like kind of like Benji Gosnell, that's where Benji Gosnell is right now. If they just add like 4 Benji Gosnells, that gets them to pretty much where they were point total wise as the 2021 class was before JTT signed. And that class already had 21 commits. And we expect, for the next few commits to Ohio State to be, potentially a Chris Mcclellan, potentially a Cam Dewberry, who's a 5-star. That would boost it up even more. So the next 4 commits, their point total goes completely toward Ohio State. Then it gets a little bit wonky with Rivals rankings, because we take the top 20 rankings, so you would have to minus the lowest rated guy if you get to 21 or above. But that's a lot of math stuff. There's a lot of me getting technical there. But overall, it's safe to say Ohio State's on a really good pace right now. And man, if it hadn't been for Alabama's stellar class last year, they probably could have signed the top-ranked 2021 class. If it hadn't been for how well Alabama recruited, and they're on pace to sign the top-ranked 2022 class. So really impressive stuff from Brian Day, Brian Hartline, Tony Alford, Larry Johnson, all of them. Just really great work overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going up against Alabama certainly creates a bit of an issue in terms of, they're just a monster. And, Ohio State really is right there doing what it needs to do. But, and I don't want to take us off onto a total tangent, but you look at like the class of 21, and I think Alabama had 27 kids in that class, whereas Ohio State had, I'm pulling it up, 22. And as Joseph mentioned, you take the top 20 players, and that creates your formula. So Alabama was able to have more guys to push down in terms of its class. Ohio State, had fewer guys, so there was less margin for error. But you look at this and you say you're taking your top 20. Ohio State's 20 that count in the class rankings formula were all at least 4 stars, because you had 4 5 stars and 16 4 stars. And unless math changed while I was gone, 16 plus 4 is still 20. So there were no threes. There was no random kicker being put in there. And of course, Jesse Mirko is part of that class. And, we know that kickers, and they just don't necessarily translate well in terms of the recruiting ranking. They can go to the Coles, kicking camp or whatnot, 5-star, based on that. And I trust, what those services have for that, for the snappers and for the specialists. But when it comes to rivals rankings, it's hard because you could be the best kicker, and certainly a kicker could lose you a game or win you a game. But are you going to? I'm gonna get emails from kickers yelling at me. But here we go. How do you compare a top 3 kicker against maybe the nation's number 21st defensive end? I mean, it's very difficult. It's a difficult thing that Adam Gorney and his staff have to do in trying to put the rankings together. And just traditionally, specialists, if you can't get your class past 20 and you have a specialist in that class, you ain't winning the team recruiting rankings, because you've got a 2-star, maybe if you're lucky a low 3-star, who will probably be a little bit of an anchor to the buoyancy of your class. But
yeah, it's Kevin. It's crazy because even with Miracle in the class, he was a 2-star prospect. Ohio State finished with a higher average star rating than Alabama did. So Alabama technically signed the top-ranked class because they had more points, but that's because they have 5 more commitments as well. Whereas with this upcoming class right here, with the 2022 class of Ohio State, I expect them to reach about 25, 26 commits, which would be 3 or 4 more than what they had in 2021. So that also plays a huge factor there too. So in terms of quality of commits, like comparing commit to commit, Ohio State could have signed just as impressive of a class in 2021 as Alabama did, especially considering, the fact that they got JTT and Jack Sawyer there, and, just Mete Ibuka, just really impressive stuff overall. But Alabama had 5 more commits, so that brought up their point total significantly. So I love looking at the rankings. I love playing with the math. But in the end, the Buckeyes aren't too concerned with that, in my opinion. It'd be nice to say, sign the top-ranked class to have that win over Alabama. But in the end, they really got who they wanted in this 2021 class, barring a couple of misses.
I finally found my Excel spreadsheet. So 25-31 would be good for the number 8 class overall. And when you sit there and you look at all the classes above 25-31, all of them have at least 21 players all the way up to 26, with that 2018 class checking in as the high water mark at 3192. I certainly need to update this spreadsheet to reflect JTT and to move 2022 up to where it belongs right now. But just a quick look, it would be 28th. It would be 8th, with the next 3 classes all in the 2700s. Very, very reachable with just with a solid 4-star who's a member of the Rivals 250 and has some bonus points attached. But
yeah,
let me jump into our final topic here, as we're at the 38-minute mark, and you can tell I've been gone because we just have so much to talk about. And it's kind of a running joke over at Buckeye Grove that when I travel, kids commit to Ohio State. And this is something that goes all the way back to when I was on my honeymoon in 2007. And then I didn't leave the country for a long time, and then just started taking a yearly trip, with 2020 being a no trip because of everything that was going on in the world. But let me go through some of the names that have committed while I've been gone. And obviously, this most recent trip, JTT, Terence Brooks, and Kojo Antwi. But we can go back to, it was a huge run while I was in Mexico in 2019 with Darian Henry, who now goes by Darian Henry Young, Cody Simon, Joe Royer, Mitchell Melton, Josh Fryer, and Cameron Martinez all committing during that trip. Previous trip, Jack Miller committed. A trip prior to that, Tate Martell committed, and we're not here to debate the merits of Tate Martell. We're just saying he committed while I was gone. But this goes all the way back to my honeymoon, when Michael Brewster, J.B. Shugarts, and Nathan Williams all committed. And certainly there's something to be said that most of my trips occur in July, and it just seems that some kids will pop in July. My honeymoon was in April, which is a little different, but when you take 1 week out of the 52 weeks and they just have that kind of, hit number, Should I maybe open a branch office somewhere in the Caribbean? Should I just plan on being out of the country a little bit more? I mean, people are saying that they're going to start a GoFundMe on social to do that, but basically I've only heard about $6 being pledged. And while the cost of living certainly works well with the American dollar, I don't think I'm going to get very far with $6.
Yeah, I think you're going to need a little bit more than that, Kevin. I've only been out of the country once to the Bahamas, but I don't think $6 would have gotten me that too far out there. So, but wow, it's just crazy how many players have decided to commit while you're on vacation. May have to line up another one of those. Maybe that'll push a couple of those prospects we talked about earlier in the show to commit sooner rather than later.
Exactly, and I'm throwing this out there to the football office right now, to Mark Pantoni and Aaron Dunston and everybody involved. If they pass a hat around there, you know, I'm willing to leave the country for a couple of days, especially during maybe Ohio State's open week on the football season, or we can work together on this. And it seems to be a case of where I need to be somewhere south. You just don't send me up to Toronto and say, have at it right there. I mean, I've taken several trips up to Canada, and it doesn't seem to happen there. It's when I'm truly at my most inaccessible, on a beach with a Sammy Sosa drink in my hand and the ocean waves in the background, that players seem to commit. And again, it's just one of those funny instances or whatnot, but it was pretty intense seeing player after player go. And I think we really could see somebody commit here pretty soon in the next, I don't know. I talked to a lot of people, and there's some people who certainly believe that something could be in the offing if they're able to get their ducks in a row or whatnot. And I'm not going to name any names at this point, because if I say it and they don't commit, then I'm not going to be out of the country on a vacation. I'm going to be run out of the country for giving wrong information. But it's just kind of crazy how all of that's working out.
Yeah, it really is. We should try and test the theory and see if maybe on Griffin's upcoming vacation, if any more commitments pop up, and see which vacation leads to the most commitments. But yeah, it's definitely a really interesting phenomenon that's going on there.
Absolutely, but we knew coming out of an unprecedented June that it had all of the makings to lead to a wild July, and here we are, a weekend, July 7th, and Ohio State is sitting with a record-setting type of 22 class. They get a player who took his recruitment into about like the 8th overtime with JTT, land him, have one of the most freakish defensive line classes in program history. It's a testament to Ryan Day and his staff. Many of them who came in under Urban Meyer, learned from Urban Meyer, who right there with Nick Saban was amongst the best recruiters in the game. And now it appears that you got to have Ryan Day there. And I think there are a lot of people that are still trying to play, well, it's a coattails thing. Well, at what point is it not a coattails thing? He certainly has brought in certain guys that are part of his staff. I mean, Brian Hartline was a Ryan Day hire, and we've already gone round and round about what he's been able to do. We certainly hear a lot of great stuff about Al Washington on the recruiting trail. That is a Ryan Day hire. So it isn't a matter of this being a carbon copy of Urban staff. I mean, there certainly are more than a few holdovers, and certainly in those key support roles, and that's not any way to denigrate what Mark Pantoni or Brian Voltini or Mickey Marotti do, but those aren't necessarily quote unquote those on-field coaching roles per se. So there's the foundation is still there from what Urban Meyer brought in when he took over the program in 2012, but I think Ryan Day has certainly not given any ground, and I think in a lot of ways he's made his own strides.
Yeah, he really has, and I think that these past 2 weeks have kind of showed the versatility of his staff. In terms of, you talked about the long drawn out recruitment of JTT, staying with it, continuing to battle all the ups and downs that they had to go through in that recruitment. But then you also see them pull off a victory with Terence Brooks, where they have to go up against some big programs in their respective conferences for a guy they just offered over a couple of weeks prior to him committing. And then you land, guys like Kayla Brown and Kojo Antwi in a wide receiver room that could potentially scare off some competition, but it didn't. And then you have the evaluation process of Dallin Hayden, where you offer several running backs in the summer of 2020, and then you start winding it down and realizing who you really want, and you come out to Dallin Hayden earlier this year. That's when we started to realize he was their number one back, and then they eventually land him over Notre Dame. So I thought in terms of the 5 commitments, it really showed off how versatile the staff is, how well they can recruit at different positions, how they can recruit in the long game with JT, and then how they can recruit in the short game too with Terence Brooks. So, I thought a commitment from Xavier Nwankpa or Zion Branch would have probably put the icing on the cake, but man, it's a sweet cake as it is if you're an Ohio State fan and the Buckeyes in general.
Last thing, something we didn't prepare for, but we'll use this as our walk-off. On social media, it was pretty interesting to see a little exchange that was going on between Ohio State linebacker commit C.J. Hicks and Penn State defensive line commit Ken Talley. And, it's a good-natured ribbing or whatnot, and, Talley is certainly proud of the Penn State class around him and whatnot, but C.J. Hicks is pretty vicious. I mean, he came right in and just shut the door on Ken Talley. I mean, basically the insinuation was that, you know what, if you're not going to play early at Ohio State, and so I mean, basically just trying to find a way to say that come to Penn State and get out there on the field and so on and so forth. And C.J. Hicks came on and just basically said that he was still salty, that Talley was salty that Ohio State didn't offer, and hilarity ensued from there.
Yeah, the original tweet by Talley was deleted, and Hicks' tweet was deleted as well. I don't want to misquote Talley and what he said, but the insinuation was there that essentially you go to Ohio State, you're going to be waiting. And that's kind of saying that Ohio State is actually doing really well. So it was a kind of a compliment in a way, like a backhanded compliment that Ohio State's doing so well recruiting, that even with how much talent they have on the roster, they're still continuing to add these types of commits. And then CJ said that, he released a private DM between them where essentially Talley said that he wanted an OSU offer or to get into OSU. I really couldn't make too much out of the context there, but he was showing interest in the Buckeyes, the very school that he had denigrated in the tweet above. So that blew up on social media. And I find it interesting how Talley essentially said that Penn State is recruiting so well and kind of led to the conclusion that, no one's hotter on the trail than them right now when Penn State has 2 more commits than Ohio State does. They have 18 compared to the Buckeyes 16. Yet they have almost 700 less total points on the rivals team ranking. So I'm trying to see where he's getting at there. Like I was trying to see if there was actually an argument that could be made there, but there really isn't. They have the same number of 4 stars committed, 11, but Ohio State has 4 5-stars compared to Penn State's 0. So I honestly, there's no team right now in the 2022 class recruiting better than Ohio State, just objectively, from a statistical standpoint, just in terms of the commits they brought in. So that was an interesting argument to be made from the very get-go, and CJ rightfully shut the door on that one.
Right. Penn State's got the number 3 ranked recruiting class according to the Rivals.com team rankings, but as you said, it's about 700 points difference. There are no 5-stars in the Penn State class. There's no RR 6.0s, which means generally about top 50 or so players. And, there are 4 5.9s, and one of them is from the state of Ohio, Caden Saunders, wide receiver, player that Ohio State certainly looked at, but probably liked a little better on defense. But you know what? I think it's good. I think it's good for the rivalry, for these guys to, have a little bit of a back and forth. Keep it clean, especially since, we just don't know where the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is at this point. It's not even close in terms of recruiting. Ohio State has almost a 1,200-point lead on Michigan at this point. I don't know how many commits Michigan has. I'm trying to pull that up as we speak. 14, so a couple less than Ohio State. Michigan does have a big-time 5-star with Will Johnson out of Grosse Pointe, Michigan. So it'll be interesting. But any final thoughts as we are over the 50-minute mark? It was going to be a quick podcast. We'll just get a couple thoughts out, get this thing posted, have lunch, and here we are at 50 minutes. So, Joseph, the floor is yours. Any final thoughts?
No, just my final thought is that Kevin, you should be taking some more vacations. Definitely was a packed week there or so with the commitments that happened. Terence Brooks, JT, Kojo, while you were out of town, and it was just a great time for Buckeye fans, just in terms of how well they've recruited on the trail. And after June, where they saw 3 commitments, but we're expecting 5, 6 maybe. You're starting to see those dividends get paid off here in the week following. I think you're going to see a couple more commitments. On the last podcast, I predicted that they would get one at the last minute, if you recall. I don't know if I'm going to go that far, but I think before we hop on again, they may get another one, whether that's 2022 or 2023. So, just a great show overall. Thank you so much for having me on once again, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with your sentiment there. I'm going to say that by July 14th, Ohio State will have at least one more commitment. I'm not willing to lock down whether it's 22 or 23. I certainly have people messaging me with, oh, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But I just tend to think somebody's going to jump on, because Ohio State sitting at, 16 players right now in their class, and something's going to give at some point. And I think that it's going to be a case of where it's going to be, all right, well, we're going to take 1 at this position, we're going to take 2, and you best get on if you're going to do it. We'll see. And, we'll be back next week to see if Joseph and I are right there. Probably not taking an international trip this week, so could slow things down, but we'll have a whole lot more to talk about. Joseph, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
And I want to thank you all for listening to the show. Once again, this is a BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, Buckeye Grove Instant Access. Want to thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.